John Sturges is the great bridge between the terrific classical filmmakers of Hollywood's great studio period, the people we all know about, like John Ford and Howard Hawks and William Wyler, and the people who came a little bit after Sturges, people like John Frankenheimer and Sam Peckinpah, and maybe even Sidney Lumet and Franklin Schaffner, people who came from TV and brought a more iconoclastic view to some of America's traditional genres. I think what makes Sturges so great is that he is an invisible movie maker the way that Ford and Hawks often were in the 30s. The story is the star of the film, no matter how many great personality stars he introduces within the course of that narrative. One reason that the auteur critics were able to interpret the personality of people like Ford and Hawks through their visual style was that there were obvious things that each man did, whether it was the kind of straight-ahead framing of a Howard Hawks or the long, heroic lines along the horizon of a John Ford. Sturges didn't operate that way. I think his editing training gave him a way to objectively analyze the frame. And I think that that kind of objectivity is part of what makes him, in a way, culturally more exciting to certain generations of filmgoers than the classical guys were even in their great 30s and 40s movies. Sturges's movies rest on traditions, on what we think of a classic Western story or a classic World War II story. But by underplaying all the rhetoric about it, by underplaying all the rah-rah patriotism or all the sentiment about building a new society in the West, he lets us see all these areas in a different way. He wanted to give you the thing as it was and have his feelings emerge from how he depicted the action. And I think when he had a good piece of material, he could do things with it no one else could. And the one occasion when he had a piece of material that was close to his core, he did something transcendent with it in The Great Escape. John actually studied engineering in college in Santa Monica, and his brother Sturge, who, unlike John and his sister, kept the father's name, so his brother was actually called Sturge Karn, whereas John was John Sturges. Sturge got him a really low-level job in the art department at RKO, but he soon became an office boy, which was a real step up, and sort of functioned as an office manager. Apparently, the story goes, he found such an intricate way to file everything deliberately so that only he could figure out where things were. And this attracted the attention of then RKO production chief David O. Selznick, who actually elevated him a great deal by making him the partner of Robert Edmond Jones, the Broadway designer, who Selznick had brought from New York to oversee the first 3-strip Technicolor productions at RKO. So very early on, John was recognized as a problem solver, as a doer and a fixer. So he requested to be an apprentice in the RKO editing department, which was full of talent at that time. I mean, coworkers were Robert Wise and Mark Robeson, both of whom went on to do great work very soon after in the 40s with Val Lewton on low-budget horror films, but also had extraordinary Hollywood careers, decades after that. And I think the thing that really catalyzed something inside his head was when he became George Stevens' editor on Gunga Din. And Stevens used him not just as an editor, but as a kind of right-hand man. I can't think of a better preparation for John Sturges' later career than having worked so closely on Gunga Din, one of the great adventure movies of all time. But when Pearl Harbor happens, Sturges enlists. I mean, he wants to be part of the war effort. And he is immediately sent to Dayton, Ohio, where he makes scores of instructional and educational films. But at a certain point, the Signal Corps and the Air Corps kind of split off, and Sturges was sent back to Hollywood, back to Culver City, actually, where the first motion picture unit, as it's called, is located. And there he meets the other great influence on his career, William Wyler. William Wyler is finishing Memphis Belle, one of the great war documentaries. And Sturges is watching him finish it, watching him sing, him record the narration, and put the movie together. Wyler enlists Sturges to help him make another movie about flying, this time a movie that'll end up being called Thunderbolt. And it is about the Thunderbolt dive bombers, a very unique plane What Wyler wants to do in the movie Thunderbolt is show this new kind of aerial tactic to the world. This idea that you could use these dime bombers to go behind enemy lines and strangle the roads and the railroads that are bringing supplies to the German army, who are, at this point, really holding off the Americans from moving up from Anzio through the rest of Italy. So it's a real hot topic and really crucial to the execution of the war. So Sturges and Wyler go to Italy, and they are based with the Thunderbolt flyers. And they have to figure out ways to put automatic cameras on each plane to really capture the action under the wings and even on the control panel to catch the actual dive bombers' expressions. And you realize that Sturges is absorbing all this, that he's absorbing how men really are able to do this incredibly tense, life or death and crucial activity, and yet remain kind of human. The movie doesn't come out till 1947, and Sturges was already back in Hollywood. So partly with having Thunderbolt in the can, whose credit reads directed and edited by Lieutenant Colonel William Wyler and Captain John Sturges, he goes to Harry Cohn at Columbia, who is known for snapping up cheap talent. And there's nothing cheaper than a novice director. And he likes what he sees with Sturges, and he gives him a shot. And Sturges does a string of programmers for Columbia. He gets a reputation as a craftsman who can deliver the goods and do it on a schedule. And I think that comes to the attention of Dory Shary at MGM. And he hires Sturges. Sturges does terrific work for him almost from the beginning. He does a movie called Mystery Street, which has a screenplay by Richard Brooks, actually, and is shot by John Alton. It attracts a lot of attention just for the way it's made and its intelligence. He does one tidy black and white suspense film that is a real breakthrough in terms of the industry really saying this is a guy to watch, and that's a movie called Jeopardy, a really tight 81-minute film starring Barbara Stanwyck and Barry Sullivan and Ralph Meeker. And it's amazing how much suspense he gets from just a father taking his family on a trip to a remote beach in Mexico. It made it really a standout. The other Western like that, I think, was Escape from Fort Bravo, which is, again, a very taut, contained adventure story about Army outpost in Arizona with William Holden as a really kind of vicious captain at the start. But the scene that really makes the film a classic is the climactic action scene in which William Holden, who plays Captain Roper, and John Forsythe, who plays his Confederate nemesis, and other Confederate soldiers and Union soldiers are pinned down by these Indians. You see Sturges as the narrative engineer and the visual engineer trying to play with who's going to survive, who's not going to survive. And he pulls it off with just economy and efficiency raised to the level of art. Bad Day at Black Rock is Sturges' first masterpiece. And it's Sturges' first widescreen film, which is amazing, because it remains probably the peak of widescreen composition for an American action movie. People think of widescreen, especially of widescreen in the 50s, as being used basically to lure people into the theater with spectacle. Sturges doesn't work that way. He uses the widescreen for drama. He, again, with his editing sense of what the different planes in an image are and where the emotion is and how you can accentuate it, he uses the widescreen to kind of give us the power relations within this town. John Sturges gets his only Academy Award nomination for Best Director with Bad Day at Black Rock. So that's a huge elevation for him as a working director in Hollywood. And the culmination of this, I think, is when Hal Wallace hires him to do Gunfight at the Oak Corral. There's a thing that comes out that I think becomes very important to later movie makers. He responds to the landscape. And when you see people riding through the landscape, there's a real dynamism there. There's nothing pictorial about it, the way there is with John Ford. And it's somehow part of, but also distinct from the characters, which wouldn't be the case in Hawks, where everything is always rooted to the characters. But you get a sense of the glory of this landscape. And he designs the whole movie in a sense that shows that he knows what the heart of the movie is, even if he's not telling you explicitly. Gunfight at OK Corral, though, is the kind of commercial breakthrough for Sturges. Soon after, the Mirisch brothers are gathering all the great directorial talent they can to make a string of pictures for United Artists. One of their properties is The Seven Samurai. The movie's only been available in a very edited down version in the United States. But Sturges actually sees the full version and is knocked out by it. The Marishes can think of no better director to helm it than John Sturges. And I think they see this not just because of his command of action, but because of the way he's handled big action stars in teams in movies like Gunfight at the OK Corral. But he also knows he has to do something very different. He has envisioned a movie about a handful of personalities, a handful of gunmen actually from many different ethnic backgrounds and roots, coming down to Mexico to kind of redeem themselves, to actually live the life that they thought they were going to live. He knows he wants this new generation of actors. McQueen is the groundbreaker, and Charles Bronson is a guy who brings with him this welter of experience that might have been too impolite or coarse for previous movie stars. James Coburn comes in, and James Coburn is like the most laconic actor you could think of at that time. And Sturges now is a producer-director. He has much more of a say on how he can operate his production. And he gets into this method where he assembles his actors and he brings them to the Western Costumes Company. And then the costume designers actually design the costumes based, not on some abstract concept or some description out of the script. They base it on the actors' choices. And so it's a much more organic kind of process. I think from Thunderbolts, Sturges had a military sense of action, both in terms of planning and execution. And he knew how to lay out the geography of an action scene. And you feel part of the action, you feel inside the action. That's the magic of Sturges, is that he observes so precisely and plans so minutely and executes it with such an openness to what's actually happening on the set, and yet a rigorous idea of where it has to go, that he pulls you in and you're just with them as this happens. So John Sturges reads Paul Brickhill's book, The Great Escape, when it comes out in 1950. He immediately sees that this is his kind of material. For years, he tries to interest Hollywood producers in it, whether he's a contract director at MGM or directing a string of movies at Universal or just starting as an independent producer-director. Nobody buys it. Nobody can accept that a movie will be exciting and thrilling and uplifting to an audience if it ends with so many people dying. Magnificent Seven is not an immediate hit, but internationally it becomes a huge hit. And suddenly it's recognized as this landmark movie. And Sturges has all this power. So what does he do? He takes that property out of his pocket. He goes to the Marishes and says, now we're going to make The Great Escape. And the Marishes have enough confidence in him now that they say, you go ahead and do it. And I think this is the key to what makes The Great Escape such a brilliant movie. The one time this director, who was not a writer, fell in love with this piece of material to the extent that he did, obsessed over it for years. And by the time he had the opportunity to do it, just went full bore. It was a movie that never had a finished script. Walter Newman, Nelson Gidding, W.R. Burnett, a great writer who wrote Asphalt Jungle, the novel, and worked on the movie as well. James Clavell, who would become a best-selling novelist and film director. And Sturges actually says the finishing work on the script was done on the set. It just had to be done that way. It wasn't the best way to make a movie, but was the best way to make this movie. And I think this speaks again to what he learned with The Magnificent Seven in terms of keeping an organic action piece going, involving his actors. He knew he wanted Steve McQueen again. He uses James Garner, who, like McQueen, is a TV cowboy and who has a certain audience, but is not registered on the big screen yet. He brings back James Coburn and Charles Bronson, who had made that impact in Magnificent Seven, but it hadn't translated into their American careers yet because that movie was really so phenomenal overseas. And he brings in these British actors who are superb. Richard Attenborough, who's going to play Big X, the commander of the escape forces. He's going to collaborate with his actors on how they look. And even more than in Magnificent Seven, he's going to collaborate with his actors on what they do. McQueen is getting to be a bigger star now. McQueen doesn't see his character, who is really the outsider, the American flyer who chafes at the idea of being part of an escape organization. He doesn't see how he's going to be the hero of the movie. Now, he takes McQueen's criticism seriously. He shuts down production for a couple of weeks. He meets with McQueen. He gets another screenwriter, Ivan Moffat, who had written the script for George Stevens' Giant, to come in and work with them.
Blind spot. A guy could stand at that wire and not be seen by that tower or that tower. The one on the end is too far. They'd never see me, especially at night.
They do these great scenes together. In the opening, where McQueen's Virgil Hilts immediately measures out with his baseball where the blind spot would be between the guard towers and the camp. That introduces us to the ingenuity and the drive and the urgency that's underneath the offhandedness of the McQueen character.
We have maps of Germany, general maps, that is. In fact, we have all the information that we need for the escape routes out of Germany. But what we do not have
is a clear idea of what's 500 yards beyond those trees.
They rework the scenes in which McQueen is told by Big X that either he shouldn't escape from the camp because they're planning this big escape, or that he should escape and come back with all the information from the outside world.
How many men do you plan to take out, Roger?
250.
There'll be no half measures this time, gentlemen.
You can see no greater depiction of the difference in character between the American officers and the English officers than in the scene where Big X is saying to this organization that he's already worked with in different camps that we're going to bust out more people than ever. It's going to be 250 people.
Interesting idea. How many are you taking out?
250.
250?
Yeah.
You're crazy. You ought to be locked up. You too. 250 guys just walking down the road just like that.
When he does it to McQueen, though, it's as much of a moment for McQueen as the motorcycle in a way, as it's establishing him as a guy who will tell authority of any kind what he's really thinking deep down if the moment is right and he has to express it. So all these things speak not just to the theme of the movie, but also to Sturges' process, how he was able to make it happen. How he didn't lose his cool when McQueen was balking, even though at certain points he said, hey, we'll write you out of the movie. And I think one reason that McQueen becomes a star in The Great Escape in a way he wasn't before, it is when he matures as a character. At the moment when his partner, played by Angus Lenny, the mole who he's done all these escapes with, when he cracks and goes to the wire and is shot, suddenly there's a new gravity to McQueen's performance, and he sees something beyond himself that he wants to devote himself to. And the exchange of looks that he has with Richard Attenborough at that moment, that's when McQueen becomes a star. That's the McQueen you're going to see in movies like Bullitt or The Thomas Crown Affair, some guy who has a sense that beneath these surface things that he's doing, and aside from his general aura of cool, he has an emotional depth that the audience can respond to.
Sir, let me know the exact information you need. I'm going out tonight.
Right.
One reason I think the movie has just as much entertainment appeal as it's ever had, that it hasn't lost any of its ability to make us laugh or cheer or be shocked, is that it captures all these actors when they're at their really youthful best. It's almost like this is a movie about youth, even though it's about these guys who are veterans and have been through multiple escapes. It's because we see these guys as actors and as characters operating with all their freshest instincts, and I think that just makes it a marvel. The actual camp was in East Germany at the time, so they had no access to the actual camp. But they recreated it to such an extent that Wally Floody, who was one of the Tunnel Kings who became a technical advisor, was spooked by it when he first went on it. The whole dimensionality of it gives Sturges more play than ever before to get more kinds of shots in that, again, have this frisson of recognition of what's going on with these guys. That's because he's sort of undressing the camp for us as he's going along. The opening credits go with the trucks going into the camps, and then when they enter, we follow each of the guys who are going to be our lead guys as they case the joint. And we're casing the joint with them. We're figuring out where the wire is, where the forest is. And what this does is create an atmosphere of action. The set pieces are very contained when they get to them. The escape, the different individual escapes after the big escape, but up till then, every single moment has the possibility of action, the imminence of action, the planning of action. The trick is Sturges sustains the suspense because he sustains the feeling and he sustains the intellectual involvement the audience has. That's the key to a lot of Sturges's films. It's not just celebrating men who have specific skill sets or, have been trained a certain way. It's about men who recognize what's happened in the moment and have the intelligence to kind of modulate what they do and to adapt. I can't think of another movie that does that. But of course, McQueen and the Motorcycle is in a class by itself. I think it's interesting that throughout the movie, both in the camp and in the individual escapes, and in the actual tunnel, you're actually following lines of action. They may contradict each other, or they may be at odd angles, but they're all kind of odd lines of action that you can follow. When McQueen gets on that motorcycle, it's such a relief because he doesn't know where he's going, you don't know where he's going. It's like he's violating the geometry of the movie and taking it into a different area. We don't think of it when we first see it, but I think that's part of why it's so exhilarating. It was released in the 60s, and in that moment of total cultural confusion, it had these sort of real positive things to say about friendship and organization and shared feeling and shared goals. And it is about guys seeing beyond the surface characteristics of their fellow guys and bonding in something that's deeper than what we call male bonding. I mean, there's real love there.
Meg, all this, the organization, tunneling, Tom and Harry, kept me alive. And even though I've never been happier. Meg.
And at the end, when the tragedy seeps in, when the commandant has to tell James Donald that 50 men were executed without saying those words, it's all in Donald's face.
Only directs me to inform you that 50 men were
That is part of Sturges's legacy. It will always be when people look to action movies that elevate character and feeling over just spectacle and kinetics. I think The Great Escape will be at the top of the list.